It has been said that when the Buddha was dying, he gave a short instruction regarding the preservation of the path. And in that instruction, it is said that he said, in the future, the teachings and practices would go to other cultures, and there would be other times when what was appropriate at that time would not necessarily be helpful at a future time. And so in that teaching, he divided all of the teachings that he had given into two branches. One was that many of the teachings were what we would today call provisional. Provisional teachings are teachings that are true or false based upon circumstances. And as circumstances change for a culture, then those provisional teachings, he said, need to also change. So one example could be the language in which the practices are recited might change into another language, and at a later date they might change again. And so his injunction or instruction was to allow those provisional teachings to change as they needed to change in order that beings of that time would benefit. And of course there was an assumption that those changes would be made skillfully, not just by anybody deciding, well, this one can change, we'll do this with it. And that skillful changing was meant to be embedded in another level of understanding, which we call the definitive meaning, as contrasted to the provisional meaning. The definitive meaning, he said, should not change. Cultures come and go, times come and go, but the definitive meaning, if you change that, then the whole thing will become useless. Kind of like the foundation of a building. You can change the buildings, you can remodel, you can do all sorts of things, but if you destroy the foundation, the building will fall down. So the foundation in this case is actually fairly simple. But not necessarily simple to understand. When the Buddha was walking one day, the story is someone approached him and asked him what was the difference between him and the man who was asking the question. And he said, nothing. No difference. You and I are both completely endowed with the awakened mind. There is no difference with the awakened mind that you're endowed with or the awakened mind that I'm endowed with. The only difference is that I recognize it and you don't. And therefore you are confused and you create the causes of suffering and live in that space. So we can see there the distinction between the definitive and the ultimate meanings. The ultimate meaning was all sentient beings. All beings with a mind are endowed with a mind which is fully awakened. Though perhaps even probably not recognized. The methods by which we come to recognize the nature of that mind are generally what we call the provisional meanings. The means by which we come to recognize the nature of mind. If the Dharma is skillful and practiced skillfully and carefully, then we are practicing those provisional means in order to recognize the nature of mind. So when we engage in a practice like Chenrezig, it's helpful to keep that in mind, not in front of the mind, but kind of in the back, where it flavors our understanding as we practice, so that we don't get confused by the distinction between those two categories of ultimate and provisional. So normally it's called definitive and provisional, so we can use those terms. It's important to understand both of those categories, as it were. So for example, the mantra of Chenrezig is Om Mani Padme Hum. We might ask the question, is that an ultimate meaning or is that a provisional meaning? And it's important for us to understand that it is a provisional meaning. The mantra of Chenrezig is like Chenrezig's name. So we say Chenrezig's name by reciting Om Mani Padme Hum. Anybody's name has to be a provisional meaning. They could go to the courthouse and change their name. They could just change their name by deciding to call themselves something else, or all of their friends could decide to call them something else, and the name changes kind of organically. This is the meaning of provisional. A name is never ultimate. It's very difficult to talk about the definitive meaning of things in a way which is helpful, which is why almost all of the teachings that we hear are provisional, with small little encouragements to practice maybe just slightly in one direction or the other, so that we begin to have a sense of the distinction between the two. If we focus too long and too hard on the provisional, some of us will come to have the sense that those provisional meanings are ultimate. And when that happens, then a kind of corruption begins to happen. We think we understand something which is deep, But actually, not only do we not understand the ultimate, by virtue of thinking that the provisional is ultimate, we also are not understanding the provisional. So we get further and further away. So I wanted to just preface our practice of Chenrezig with that this morning. So that we could approach the practice maybe a little more, in a little slightly different way today than what we normally do. It's totally self-centered from my perspective, because I find that entertaining. If I'm not entertained, the teachings will not be interesting. So I want to go through the text 3 times, because we have a teaching, a provisional teaching, on the 3 wisdoms, they are called. And those wisdoms begin with what we might call a conceptual, strictly conceptual really, where what we just talked about we could call, if you listened, as opposed to reading a comic book or something or listening to the radio, you would be engaging in the first wisdom, which is the wisdom of knowledge. It's just the wisdom of understanding something in the ordinary way that we think of what an understanding is. Could be transformational for you, but it doesn't have to be. It's just an understanding. When we have engaged in study, so the first wisdom can be done by reading a book, by listening to some teachings, primarily those 2, kind of a study to see what we can understand in that way. And following that, because it's a spiritual tradition and it's meant to be transformational. The teachings are not meant to be just things we understand in a kind of cold understanding, conceptual way. They're meant to be transformational from the root of our being, throughout our entire being. In order for that to happen, that conceptual understanding will not do the job. But it's important to start there so that we gain some foothold. It's kind of like if you're going to climb a mountain, you need to train first. You need to train in the equipment that you'll need. You need to train in the clothes that you'll wear. You need to train in so many things. Those things are not the climbing of the mountain, but if you don't do those, probably you won't climb the mountain. So if you think of this as kind of climbing a mountain, then the conceptual understanding is an important prerequisite. But if you stop there, you haven't gone hardly anywhere, and it won't be satisfying. So the second thing then, after studying, is to contemplate that. You could say that that's important in almost anything that you learn, like learning to bake a cake, for example. But it's not as important as it is here to contemplate it, because our understanding of the teachings must not remain shallow. They need to organically go deeper and deeper and deeper until we begin to feel the transformation from the inside out. It's not something we paint on ourselves or that we paint on others, not something visible in that sense, but something that we, like planting a seed and watering it and looking at it and seeing how it grows and understanding something about it, but we still don't know how to make the seed grow. So contemplation is a mulling over, a thinking about, like, what do I actually understand here? and what do I not understand? And the latter, not understanding, is sometimes more important than the former, the understanding itself. Sometimes we understand, we think, before we actually understand, and that actual understanding missing and our thinking that we do understand becomes an obstacle. So keeping our minds open all the time, like routinely asking the question, do I understand? If I don't understand, recognizing that is as important as the understanding, because you know that you have a space in which some understanding can go. Once you understand, you've closed that space. Now you have a bigger job to do. And finally, after the study and the contemplation, we then get to the meditation. And at that point, we have the background. We have the training, and so we can move forward. Now, in truth, it doesn't happen like this. What happens is we study and read a little bit, and we think, I get it. And then we kind of move on to the contemplation. The contemplation maybe doesn't go so well. So we go back to the study, and then we come back to the contemplation. And then we try some meditation before we're ready to meditate. And that doesn't work so well. Then we think maybe the Dharma doesn't work. And so we go through these stages where it's an iterative process. You study, you contemplate, you meditate. You study, you contemplate, you meditate. Just you go through those over and over again. And little by little, it's like tracing a drawing that you can't quite see. It finally begins to take shape. And then we have confidence, which perhaps we didn't even know was necessary. But it is. And it needs to be based upon actual experience, not just an idea. Okay. Now you should just forget all that. This morning when we began, we did the refuge practice, turning our minds to refuge in the awakened state, the Buddha, and to the teachings, the Dharma, and to the Sangha, the practitioners of the Dharma, though we usually think of the exalted Sangha, those who have actually accomplished it, not necessarily completely, but deeply. So if we now step to page 11. It's very helpful when engaging in our practice to really have a sense of curiosity about things. Like, for example, in this text, on the first line in English, on page 11, not the title where it says refuge in bodhicitta, but the first English line that says, until enlightenment. Enlightenment should always, whenever we see that word, it should be like a speed bump. Like, at least stop for a moment and ask the question, do I have any idea what that is? Or am I, because if I don't, why am I saying that word? Enlightenment. I wish to attain enlightenment. I wish to attain. A point will come when you just throw in the towel and say, I just don't get this. But there's something always that you can get, every step of the way, until enlightenment. Why would I want to attain enlightenment? Well, first, you wouldn't want to without some sense of what it was. And we're not going to be able to understand conceptually what it is But, we can get a sense by recalling the Buddha's statement to the man who said, "What's the difference between you and me?" And the answer was, nothing. It's kind of like if you stand up in front of me and I've met you before, and you turn around and all I see is your back, one could say, what's the difference between seeing you from the back or the front? And one might say, absolutely nothing. Same person looking. But if you turn around and I see your face, I recognize you. So the Buddha was really saying, I recognize that awakened mind. That's the difference. So if we take that analogy one more step, we can say, in order for us to attain enlightenment, we must recognize the face of enlightenment. We must begin with a sense of, well, I'm not really confident that I am endowed with the awakened mind. But you could at least go, what the heck? How many things have I not had confidence in that I later discovered? Almost everything that we know, perhaps. So why not do it here? No risk, no danger. We're looking for the face of enlightenment so that we can recognize it. So we come down now in the formula here. We first imagine, so this is all part of the process of recognizing the nature of mind itself. We start by imagining. Think of Halloween, when you pretend you're a ghost, or you pretend you're a demon, or you pretend you're a fairy, or you're a sorcerer, or something like that. So now you pretend, I am endowed fully with the awakened mind. If I'm endowed with the awakened mind, what does that say about others? Is it just me and the Buddha who have it? Well, you laugh, but you would be surprised how many people actually could draw that conclusion. All sentient beings are endowed with fully awakened mind. There are no exceptions, from the smallest, most humble insect to the Buddha. All are endowed with fully awakened mind. Some, depending upon their form in this life as a human or as one of those insects, some have a better shot at recognizing it in this life, but that doesn't mean that anyone is lacking the endowment. So because we hold the view that all beings have that endowment, therefore, I imagine all of them in front of me. My past family and friends, like all beings. And why do we do that? We do that because another provisional teaching is that we are connected to all sentient beings by virtue of our stream of experience, so we could call it the stream of consciousness, continuing, unabated, transcending the boundaries of life and death, past and future, over an incalculable period of time. There is not a single being that we have not had close connection with. They've been our mothers, our fathers, our sisters and brothers, and yeah, they've been our enemies too. And we have been theirs. In other words, all the kinds of relationships that we imagine and have had with anybody Far beyond that, we have had that and much more with every sentient being. Provisional teaching. What's the value of that? Is a great question. Why would you do that? So after lunch, you can ask that question, but not now. So what we're going to do is we're going to imagine all those sentient beings, uncountable in number, uncountable in variety, in front of ourselves, extending in uncountable numbers to the very limits of space itself, like just unimaginable. More unimaginable today, I think, than it was for the Tibetans, when we think of our very small Milky Way having thousands and billions of other galaxies and stars inside of it, and then thousands and billions of those. It's a little difficult for us to wrap our minds around that. But if we do, extending to the limits of space takes on a rather dramatic sense of our smallness in comparison to that bigness. We need to think big around this. There is not a single one of those uncountable beings that I have not had a close, intimate relationship with. That being the case, perhaps I could plant a seed of wishing to bring benefit to them while I bring benefit to myself through these practices. Perhaps, in fact, even a little further down, I could imagine that that is actually the only effective goal, is to do these practices in order to benefit all of those beings. What kept that man who said, "What's the difference between you and me?" was the sense of personal identity. Me. Me, when we think me, feels really big. But when we take that me and put it in this uncountable morass of beings, it's really small. And yet, it is perhaps the single most important obstacle that we have. As long as I think of myself as separate from all of those beings, I can neither benefit myself nor them. Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha. So until I attain complete awakening and recognize that nature, I take refuge in that nature, which we call the Buddha. You can also think of it as the historical figure, pretty much the same. I take refuge in the Dharma, the teachings, and the excellent assembly, which is that Sangha, exalted Sangha, having attained awakening through the practices. And then it says at the bottom, through the merit of generosity and other virtues may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. So this refuge in bodhicitta then, that wraps it up. That then is the point at which we're ready to start training to climb the mountain. Without this, we don't have shoes or socks yet. Like we say, no refuge, then the teachings cannot bear any fruit. Because you're still going for refuge in all of your worldly things. A better car, a better husband or wife, a better cat. You don't need a better cat, we have the best one out here already. But the refuge, it's important, like nurture that sense, it's provisional meaning again, but the ultimate meaning rests in that nature of mind itself. Turn the page. Page 12. So we recite that refuge prayer 3 times, but we're just going through the kind of the meaning of it at this moment. If you look at the first line below generating the visualization, we now begin the specific practice of Chenrezig. All sentient beings arrayed in front of us. I think I have to say it's totally okay. We're steeping here in the provisional meaning of things, so it's totally okay to imagine all these beings as humans. I remember in a funny time, somebody mentioned to Khenpo Rinpoche in India that they didn't know what to do about visualizing all the snakes and all of these animals and things. And it's just a cultural thing, really. We felt like, you're going to visualize all sentient beings, you visualize their forms too, which is also okay. But it was also okay to visualize them as human beings, and the reason is because they all were human beings. They weren't whatever they are now. That's not what they always were, and it's not what they will be. So it's okay to visualize them as anything, but visualizing them as human beings might make it easier to feel like a close connection. So that was all provisional meaning once again. On the crown of myself and sentient beings pervasive as space is a lotus and moon seat. So we imagine now, first of all, not exactly this. In all of these texts we're looking at little summaries, little shorthand for something that isn't being explicitly stated. In this case, before we actually follow the instruction, on the crown of myself and sentient beings pervasive as space is a lotus and moon seat, first we imagine on the crown of our own head. We just imagine a lotus in full bloom, and on that lotus is a moon seat, the white lotus and the moon seat. So a moon seat is a common phrase in the Vajrayana. So we imagine here a flat disk like the moon, as if you could take the moon as a flat disk out of the sky, and it was maybe just the size of fitting on that lotus. You could just lay it there, and then on top of that we imagine what we call a seed syllable. So there is a seed syllable on the shrine, right in the middle, behind the candle. There's a red background there and a slightly yellow-orange Hri. That Hri is called a seed syllable. You don't actually need to know that Hri, but along the way we generally learn to visualize that Hri. And if you want to learn to visualize it at that point, then the best way to do that is to learn to write it, which only takes about 1 or 2 minutes, and then if you write it a dozen times or more, it becomes very clear to remember. Like writing something puts it in our mind in a certain way. Very easy to remember it and visualize it. So we imagine this Hri sitting on the moon seat on the crown of our head, standing up. It's not orange like that. It's a brilliant silvery white. And that Hri, we think to ourselves, is the nature of mind itself. The nature of mind itself. So before you jump up and say, wait a minute, isn't that a provisional teaching? I'll say, yes, it is a provisional teaching. And the reason it is because we visualize the nature of mind in all sorts of forms all the time. So that's the clue that says it's provisional. We never say, your awakened mind is not the same as mine, is different than mine, not as good as mine. Mine is definitely better. We never say those kinds of distinguishing things. but we use everything at our disposal, ultimately, to remind ourselves continuously of that awakened mind. And here we start first by just thinking of it as the appearance of the Hri. So you can ask the question, is it possible that the Hri could appear there unless we were endowed with an awakened mind? That's a question for you after lunch. For now, we visualize the Hri and we think this is the awakened mind. It manifests from the awakened mind, and it itself fully embodies the awakened mind. Now, you don't have to believe this. It's not something to believe. Just engage in the practice. Light radiates from that Hri. It radiates in all directions. In all directions. The cardinal points of a compass, like for those cardinal directions, and also up and down. And that light strikes all sentient beings to the very limits of space. Now you know this is not a science experiment because light couldn't go to the limits of space in the time of this session. So this is not something which can be verified by science. We're engaging in a practice. So the light goes out, it strikes all sentient beings. When it strikes all sentient beings, it is also the case that every sentient being is now has on the crown of their head a lotus and a moon seat and a Hri. Likewise, then the light goes to the realm of the Buddhas. The Buddhas return blessings in the form of light, which strikes that Hri on the crown of our head, and that Hri appears as Chenrezig instantly. Well, Chenrezig always was the nature of mind itself. So the only difference here is, like when we say, if I face you, you can recognize me, but if I turn my back to you, am I not the same person? So all that's happened here is we've turned it around so that we can see it, and then we recognize it. In this case, it doesn't turn around, it doesn't move. We just imagine, I recognize it as the nature of mind. So it doesn't look like anything we ordinarily work with, which is actually important. If it's some things that we ordinarily work with, we are suddenly demoting the nature of mind. That's not going to work so good. Mm-hmm. So we think this is the nature of mind. Now, if we keep reading here, every sentient being now is endowed with this. And the light from the Buddha has come back and struck the Hri on the crown of the head of each being. And so all beings are endowed now with the form of the Buddha on the crown of the head. Then, continuing with the text itself, on the crown of myself and sentient beings, pervasive as space, is a lotus and moon seed. Okay, we did that. From the Hri, and we understand this is a summary here, from the Hri, which we generated by those steps we already went through, appears the noble Chenrezig. So the Hri appears instantly as Chenrezig. Clear, white, and radiating five-colored light. So there's a tanka up here with Chenrezig on the kind of the blue with the red square around it. Chenrezig, now we need to think of as, in essence, the appearance of the nature of mind. The appearance of the nature of mind. So the truth is that our minds are constantly appearing as something. I might even say, I look at anyone in this room and I could say, they are the appearance of mind. In this moment, they are the appearance of mind because I'm looking at that person. That appearance is the nature of mind. So we have to be a little careful with that. What we want to, because for example, I may be looking at somebody I don't like. Now I got a problem. So we want to focus our attention on the nature of mind appearing as something which is transcendent, which is beyond our ordinary experience. And so Chenrezig provides that for us. We'll describe Chenrezig in a moment. So he says, from the Hri appears the noble Chenrezig, clear, white, and radiating five-colored light. Going down to page 13, smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes. He has four hands, four arms. So now we're going to just talk about that a little bit. The first pair of his four hands are joined together, like this, at his heart. The lower two of his four hands hold a crystal mala and a white lotus. So a crystal mala is like a rosary, and he holds that in his right hand, and in his left hand he holds a lotus in full bloom. Then it says, adorned with jewels and silk, he wears a deerskin upper garment. So Chenrezig appears with four arms, like we just said, one head. So now here is the secret to this thing. Chenrezig embodies the entire Dharma. All of the awakened minds of all beings, all of the teachings, all of the contemplation, all of the meditation, all of the methods. So when we look at Chenrezig, we need to think that here is the appearance of the awakened mind. The entire Dharma is contained in it. So we could say this, and we do say this, about every practice we engage in. The entire Dharma is contained in that practice. This is helpful at times when we think what we're doing is better than what some other lineage is doing. So don't forget it. Furthermore, every aspect of Chenrezig's body, the ornaments, the clothing, the things that Chenrezig holds, they all contain the essence of the entire Dharma, without a single exception. He has one head. Now that's a strange thing to say. Is it not? He has one head. Everything about Chenrezig is about a teaching in the Dharma, a level of realization of the Dharma. It's not just a piece of artwork to enjoy. It's actually the visual appearance of the entire Dharma. So, for example, let's go back to the beginning. On the crown of myself and sentient beings, pervasive of space, is a lotus and moonseat. From the Hri appears the noble Chenrezig, clear, white, and radiating five-colored light. But when we look at Chenrezig, we see one face. And one face has a meaning. Actually, one face has a whole range of meanings, but we generally bring these things down to something that we can grasp. One face here, which is also white. The one face means that Chenrezig enjoys the realization of the nature of all, the one nature of all things, of all appearances, of all experiences. And the white says that he is without fault, without defect. In this case, you have to be careful because those are kind of relative terms. But what it really means is that there is nothing about Chenrezig which does not lead to the causes of happiness, away from the causes of suffering, to the causes of ultimate joy in the virtues of others. And we could wrap all that up and say that it all leads to a sense of transcendent equanimity. As we talk about each of these provisional things, we can get a sense of kind of a microscopic view of something, and it can also feel somewhat small and not interesting. So we go back and forth between the provisional and the ultimate. The crystal mala in his right hand, which is normally used to count mantras, right? Some people will have a mala and count mantras if they're saying Om Mani Padme Hum, Chenrezig's mantra. But Chenrezig's crystal mala is the sign that he is capable of magnetizing confused beings who live in a world of suffering out of that realm into the realm of the Dharma in order to accomplish their own happiness and the cause of happiness for others. So the crystal mala says he magnetizes beings from that place. The white lotus is a symbol, a marker for Chenrezig's ability to enter into the world of confusion without being touched by it. Like a lotus that blooms in a muddy pond, but itself is pure white. So Chenrezig enters the world of confusion, but does not become himself confused. He is adorned with jewels and silk, and he wears a deerskin upper garment. The deerskin upper garment is sometimes viewed as in the following way. His kindness, his equanimity, his realization is so apparent that wherever he is, conflict dissolves. It can't survive. It's like when you breathe on your mirror in the morning and it clouds up, the smallest amount of heat vaporizes that and it just disappears. In the same way, Chenrezig's presence is a cause for conflict to just disappear. So one understanding of the deerskin upper garment. Did we get to the 5 colors? Yep. His forearms represent what we call the 4 immeasurables. And again, a relative teaching here, but our understanding can grow deeper with this. The 4 arms each represent one of the 4 immeasurables. So we have immeasurable kindness, we have immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy in the virtues of others, and immeasurable equanimity. And these 4 are immeasurable because they are focused on uncountable beings, not because the joy itself is immeasurable. In other words, We don't need to have immeasurable joy in order to practice immeasurable joy. We practice immeasurable joy by holding the wish for immeasurable joy or experiencing joy for all sentient beings, those who are engaging in those things which bring about their own benefit and the benefit of others. So Chenrezig represents those immeasurables. What are my pages here? Okay. What is there? Mixed up somehow. Oh, I'm missing a page. Yeah, it goes from 13 to 15. Oh, you're right. Okay, I got it. 14. Okay, let's go back to page 12. I'm going to take a break in a bit from the free. Okay, smiling, gazing with compassionate eyes. The first pair of his four hands are joined together, holding a jewel. There's a large jewel, which is to say the jewel represents or points to his ability to fulfill the deepest wishes of all beings. Lower two hold a crystal mala and a white lotus. He's adorned with jewels and silk, and he wears a deerskin upper garment. The jewels and five colored silks represent the five wisdoms, which you can ask about again after lunch if you want. The five wisdoms and various qualities of his being. His head ornament is Amitabha. On the head of Chenrezig is the Buddha Amitabha, who is red in color and just about the size of your thumb. If you imagine a small red Buddha sitting on the top of Chenrezig's head, that's what it looks like. He's about the size of a thumb. So now we come to a definitive meaning. Amitabha is a Buddha. Chenrezig is what we call a bodhisattva, one who has accomplished the Dharma to a great degree. Chenrezig is an emanation of Amitabha. So Chenrezig is an emanation of a Buddha. So does that make Chenrezig a Buddha? The answer is sort of. Chenrezig, let's put it this way, we could tell a short story. Amitabha sees the suffering in the world of all sentient beings. Even when they're happy, they're creating the causes of future suffering. And so Amitabha, in order to benefit them, emanates Chenrezig. Chenrezig appears in the world as transcendent compassion and loving kindness. Amitabha, on the other hand, does not appear in the world in a way which can be recognized by most beings. And so he emanates Chenrezig, who appears in the world by virtue of things that we can witness easily. And so we are affected by that. Still, then, you could say Chenrezig is Amitabha by virtue of being an emanation of Amitabha, but it's Amitabha appearing in the world in order to benefit beings. So we might say you can only appear in the world of humans looking just so different before you become irrelevant. If you don't appear like others, you cannot affect others in a positive way. In fact, the joke kind of is, if you appear different enough from others, they kill you. So the skillful means of Amitabha is to manifest as a bodhisattva. So coming down to the end here, his head ornament is Amitabha. His two legs sit in the Vajrasana, that is, they're crossed in what we often call lotus position, which means that he fully embodies the essence of both the provisional and definitive meanings. There's other ways that can be talked about, but since we're using those terms. He is the embodiment and essence of all sources of refuge. So that's Chenrezig and Amitabha. So finally we come down to homage to Chenrezig, which we'll first take a break and then get back to that. And when we get back to it, then we're going to actually engage, go through the practice once, and see if we can have some experience based on our conceptual understanding, our contemplation a little bit of what the meaning is. So we'll take 10 minutes now and come back.